I have been looking forward to this conversation for a very long time. As you can see there in the very beautiful Danish outsides, I guess this is a beautiful shot you provided us, is Jacob Karsbro. Karsbro, the former intelligence analyst who worked for the Danish intelligence. He's also a best-selling author on two very important books that are very relevant to our Paulo Zampoli investigation. Jacob, thank you for taking time out of your vacation, this beautiful location that you're in, to join us today. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Seb. I'm actually up near the top of Denmark, so if people are familiar with the geography, I'm near the top. it's
the very top.
It's just 20 kilometers in that direction.
You can't see Greenland from there, can you?
Maybe. No, but the geography here, it reminds me a little bit of Montauk on Long Island. It's a bit the same. That
that sounds lovely.
Into the ocean. So yeah,
that sounds absolutely lovely. It looks lovely. It looks like you're having a nice evening. It's late in the evening there, and look at the sunshine and brightness there. That's because that's where Denmark is located. It's not. It gets the glory of a very long day in the summer, and then a much shorter day in the winter.
Far north.
Yeah. That's right. Let me ask you this important question. We had several investigations in the last few weeks where we've revealed what Amanda Ungaro has revealed to us about Paulo Zampoli, which is this enigmatic figure which has been a part of the Epstein-Trump world forever, it seems. I mean, since the 1980s, he's sort of been floating around in the background of almost every major significant thing that network did. Now, he started life as a fashion model agent. And part of that meant that he discovered Melania Knaus, as she was then known. And he brought her to America. He introduced her to Donald Trump. And, the love story is well known after that. Yet, on the other hand, he also became a pretty big figure in the United Nations, which is interesting for us because I didn't realize how big an operator he was within the United Nations. And he was there, I suspect, at the same time you were, because you also played a role for Denmark in the United Nations. Tell everyone what it is that you did there, and then we'll backtrack to see how it connects to everybody else.
Yeah, I was on loan to our Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It wasn't a covert role at all. But Denmark is a member of the UN Security Council every 20 years, more or less, one of these rotating seats on the council. And I was sent over there in support of our Ministry of Foreign Affairs and dealt with Kosovo and Bosnia and other issues on the Security Council. So I had meetings with a lot of these people that we're going to talk about now.
Did you know Paulo?
Yeah, not a covert role, but a normal diplomatic role. Yeah.
Did you know Paulo Zampoli?
No, and I was just scratching my head a little bit if I could recognize the name. That's not one of the names I could recognize, but I figured out that somehow he was sent there, and in spite of him being Italian, he was serving for the Dominican Republic. Is that right?
Dominica, yeah, a tiny little Caribbean island, and he was raised odd in Italy, and then he lived in the United States for the rest of his life. So how did he get that role? It turns out back then in the United Nations there was a bit of a trade in diplomatic positions and black market passports that were being done by those Caribbean nations who were quite happy to sell their positions or passports for $250,000. And apparently he was involved in that scheme too, according to his former partner Amanda Ungaro, which tells you a little bit about how the United Nations really runs. Now, you may not have been aware of Paulo Zampoli, but you must have been aware of Vitaly Churkin.
I met him, I wouldn't say several times a week, but more than once a week for all these meetings on the council, both the formal meetings from these open sessions that you sometimes see out in public, but also the closed sessions in the chambers behind the actual council. And he newly appointed when I arrived at the UN, and one thing that struck me, he didn't look like, your typical Russian diplomat. He looked quite fit, actually. He looked in good shape.
Yeah.
He didn't seem to, drink all that much. Not from anything that I've been able to see. And
He
then,
spoke
if
English
we're
really
going to
well.
talk, yeah, he spoke English. He conducted himself, in these political matters. Like, he had his brief from the
Mm,
Kremlin. But I had a direct counterpart from the Russian embassy, also a very seasoned diplomat. And I would
mhm.
say, this guy, he was actually trying to make things work, and he was trying to find solutions. And I had lots of lunches with him, because we were talking about Kosovo and how to advance this limbo that Kosovo was in, due to it being not a nation state but a
Right.
carved out part of Serbia, and being under this UN authority. So we are trying, and my counterpart there was trying to find the solutions as best he could. And Churkin, to a large extent, also seemed fairly open. And this wasn't the case for all the Russian diplomats there. And I had
Right.
other colleagues on the other dossiers, for instance, on Georgia, where, it was like talking to a brick wall. Uh,
Was he more of a
so it was
diplomat or an
quite interesting.
intelligence person, do you think? I mean, because he does seem to have a lot of ties to very prominent people at the time that, we'll go through the network in a second here, but it seems to me that he may have
Mm,
not been your classic diplomat, but more of a spy diplomat.
exactly. I will say, usually the spies that, where you think probably at the UN this could be a spy, or are not the obvious people,
Right.
and not the ones you would think. If there was someone in the chambers for the closed sessions that you feel, this guy doesn't belong there. This is a
Mm.
guy that we don't regularly see. Sometimes if these sessions got a little bit long and boring, I would have a look around and see, okay, who might be a spy
Yeah.
because of my background. So it was fairly interesting. But I will say, Churkin is, in my estimate, a pro. So
Hmm.
he played his role really well. So I think he had not only the diplomatic dossier, but also another dossier on where he was likely, an intelligence professional, also an operative
Doing something
there.
remarkable, right? I mean, he was doing something for the Russians was quite remarkable. Now, when we look back at it, he had
Mhm.
a network of people that is, we can confirm that he was connection to Jeffrey Epstein. We can confirm that he was a
Mhm.
connection to Donald Trump, and he was one of the first people to
Yeah,
recruit or cultivate Donald Trump as being an
yeah,
asset, and we'll get into that in just a few minutes. But
yeah, exactly.
and he was also part of Paulo Zampoli's life
Mhm.
from very early on. He was sort of a mentor to Paulo
Yeah,
Zampoli, and as we learned a few weeks ago, or just even last week, there is Paulo Zampoli is very reverential. That's not the right word, but it's maybe it is reverential to the Russians. He speaks
yeah,
glowingly about them. He speaks about the
yeah,
supreme leader when he's talking about Putin. He speaks,
yeah.
he says
That's
"spasiba," which means thank you, to people. He organizes events about tigers, which is Putin's pet project. If I can call it a pet. This guy is did a lot of things for the Russians, even though he didn't represent Russia at the United Nations. He represented Dominica, and he didn't represent the United States, and he didn't represent Italy, which is the countries you'd think he'd belong to, but he was very representative of Russia.
A pet project in more ways than one, should we say? Put it like that. No, but it's super interesting because when I arrived and when I worked at the council, I didn't know all this, and it's only afterwards, after Churkin died, allegedly of a heart attack, but he was a diplomat, so it's actually the Russians. There's no autopsy done in the U.S. It's all handled.
Oh, you froze there.
Russians. Am I okay here?
Yeah, I think you're breaking up a little bit, but I hear you. Maybe just let the buffer a little bit, but maybe it's the Russians not liking you talking about this.
But anyway, what I was saying was that this whole pattern that his cause of death could be anything, because we only know this from the Russians. And when you then look at the when you look at the Epstein files, and when I saw that and all his lunches with Epstein, and you look at the timeline, when did these things happen? And when did Trump come into office? And as I've said, as all these things, coincidence takes a lot of planning.
That's a very smart way of putting it.
Especially in that line of work, So all these mysterious things, it looked like a pattern, I would say.
Yeah, people always ask how I figure out some of these stories, and a lot of it is just looking at timelines. You slot these things into timelines, and there's no other possible answer to how these things would have happened in the sequence they had, including his death, which was not the only diplomatic death to happen after the election in 2016. There was a few Russian people who sort of met their end, and Churkin was one of them. And I think very poignantly, at one point, Jeffrey Epstein writes to Peter Thiel saying, Vitaly's dead. Life is short. Start with dessert, I think was the exact quote from his email to Peter Thiel. And what are the odds that Churkin knew Jeffrey Epstein, Thiel knew Jeffrey Churkin? These are the same people. You constantly bump into them all over the place.
Yeah.
Now, does that mean it's all a Russian operation? Maybe, but it could also be something else. But it certainly feels to me like Churkin was very responsible for building a network of American influential people.
It does seem like that, Sev. And I will say, then we haven't touched upon this whole thing about the former Israeli Prime Minister, former Israeli Defense Minister, Ehud Barak.
Yeah.
Because that has led to a lot of allegations that this is Mossad, this is all the Israelis, etc., etc. And guess who said that only a couple of days ago? Who said it?
I don't know who said it.
J.D. Vance.
Oh, really?
J.D. Vance.
Epstein.
This is all Mossad and CIA. It's all the deep state, etc., etc. When I look at it, when I look at all this, not concrete evidence, not anything that we can, say definitive, but all the circumstantial evidence, it seems more like to me that this Russian web that they always use to gather kompromat on important people has been wrapped around Ehud Barak as well. And
for Ehud Barak, yes.
This is indeed a Russian operation. It I think the more I look into it,
it is a Russian operation. I think so for sure, but I also think it has connections to Israeli military intelligence, not Mossad per se. In my understanding of it, Epstein and Robert Maxwell in particular had very strong allegiances to Israel just because of their faith. And also because, there's a connection between a lot of Israelis who come from Russia. I was born in Israel, but my parents came from Russia. They escaped Russia as little kids, but that's where they came from. And in the 1980s, when there was this great refusnik movement, and people came leaving the Russian world, and many Jews were amongst them. Many of them came to Israel to settle, and now you have 20% of the population of Israel is actually Russian. They're not maybe even Jewish, but they're Russian. That has changed the whole landscape of what Israel is, and it's allowed Russian influence to seep into Israeli intelligence too. And the Russian oligarchs are there funding all these offshoots of the Unit 8200 and those kinds of places, creating independent private companies that are based on the intelligence solutions of the government. So there's a bit of a blessing there that happens, and we've seen Bibi Netanyahu and Putin and Trump align a lot in the last while. So does that all mean that Epstein was involved with all of that? I mean, to some extent, that is the same network. You look at the people who surround Putin. A lot of them are Jews. A lot of them are Chabadnik Jews, and a lot of the people that are the oligarchs today, many of them are Jews, and many of them live in Israel. So I think it's a little bit of both. But you're the intelligence guy, and I'm just a journalist guessing from the outside from what I see. So I don't. I'll take your word for it. I certainly think it's more Russian than it is anything else.
Yeah. And that is also my assessment, because the Russian have this way of operating where they get kompromat, and then they build on the kompromat to wrap this treasonous web around important people. And that also seems to me to be the case in this instance. And this treasonous web
didn't
that
know. I mean, Barak knew he was getting bought for $5 million a year or whatever it was. He knew that that's what he was doing. He was selling out to Putin. I mean, it's not like,
Yeah, but I think at the outset, probably he wasn't aware. But this has started with a web and some kompromat, and then he's under pressure, and then they build on it.
Right. Well, that's how they do it.
That is a very normal Russian modus. Modus operandi. As soon as you get a little on someone, you use that to put more pressure on, to put more, to get more kompromat, and then you wrap that treasonous web around them.
It's a good.
And that seems to me the plausible explanation.
I think so. And, it brings us back to 1983. And I want to play you a clip of an interview I did with Yuri Shvets, who is a former KGB head of the Washington Bureau. Do you know Yuri? You must know Yuri. That's across your paths. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yuri described to me how Donald Trump was cultivated as a Russian asset back in 1983. And this is the same time you were sort of beginning. You think you were in 1985. When were you in the United Nations? 19. Maybe I got the years wrong.
I was there way later. It's 20 years ago now. 2005 to 2007.
Okay. Sorry, I got the dates wrong.
Yeah.
The time flies when you're having so much fun. But let's listen to Yuri, and because I think it's the guy that arranged Donald Trump's trip to Russia in 1987. It's supposedly the United Nations ambassador. Again, the United Nations ambassador that preceded Churkin, Dubunin, I think, or Dubin. I don't know. We'll get the name in a second. But he couldn't speak Russian very well, so the work landed up going to his daughter, who revealed all this in a later stage. But Churkin was involved in 1987 in organizing the trip as a diplomat of Donald Trump to Russia in 1987, which was unheard of. But let's take a trip back in time here with Yuri.
At least 83, that it's time to establish a direct contact with Donald Trump from somebody from Russian New York residentura. This time to speed up and deepen cultivation of the targets.
Who was it? If I may interject there's a bit here. At one point, I asked Yuri what Trump was like as a target for recruitment, and I think he can tell you his answer that it was he was just the ideal target. Why don't you go and explain, Yuri?
Yes. Yeah, important to be recruited. Women. I mean, everything in this guy, everything is out of place, out of proportion. Everything is exaggerated, It's like a combination of extremes, extreme vanity, extremely low IQ, extreme narcissism, and extreme
ego and
love to
Impulse.
flattery, and obviously and greed.
Greed.
You have it all there.
So easy to get.
Yeah, and one of the obvious things that the idea of putting a Trump Tower, a monument to capitalism, in Red Square in the middle of the Cold War when we were at each other's throats is just obscenely ridiculous. But Donald Trump is vain enough, he's narcissistic enough, not even to consider that.
And so who made that first contact in 1983 to take it to the next level? Who was the actual person?
Well, actually, now we know with studies with Craig that one person we know was the daughter of then ambassador. First, he was the head of the Soviet mission at the United Nations, Yuri Dubinin, and several months later, he became the Soviet ambassador to Washington, D.C. I strongly believe that she was a Russian intelligence officer. And it was a really a hard time because in 86,
Save your audio.
Yeah, you can hear me there. You can hear me now.
There
I
you
think.
are.
I'll post the full interview down below, but he does get kind of on a sidetrack there. But it's remarkable to hear a former KGB Washington bureau chief, basically saying, we were after him. We went after him, and our United Nations ambassador went after Trump and began compromising him. It still surprises me today that people don't believe that there is a Trump Russia, that they still think that some people still believe it's a hoax. When you've got evidence like that from Yuri Shvets saying, this is how we did it, it's remarkable.
Yeah, exactly. I also saw these interviews with the US vets before I released my book in March, and this is this is well described, and in the book I actually we've only focused on the the economical links. And this issue of Trump, his narcissism, his money plays every role in his brain, etc., etc. All these things that makes him every recruiter's dream.
Yeah.
And then the Epstein files were only released afterwards. And it's like, it just, it puts everything into perspective and just,
It does add up.
it does add up. And as I said in the beginning, coincidence takes a lot of planning. It's it's really.
Well, let me ask you then
wild,
about the coincidence of Melania Knaus. Now, we mentioned that, Churkin, who was the guy who got Trump into, one of the part of the team that got Trump cultivated into the KGB. We know that Churkin was a long-standing connection to Jeffrey Epstein. And we know as well that he was good friends with Paulo Zampoli. I'll play you the clip of him at his birthday where they talk about tigers. It's they clearly like each other a lot. And then we also know that Paulo Zampoli, who was so close to Churkin, is the reason Melania Trump came from, Melania Knaus in Slovenia on an Einstein visa, and then made her way to Jeffrey Epstein, and then Jeffrey Epstein to Donald Trump, all the same circle, as a model / I don't know what else they did as part of that modeling network, but there's some allegations that there were other things. But that's how Melania came to be an American and an American citizen, is under the auspices of this guy who is so connected to Russia and Russian intelligence, and who was the United Nations, ambassador, and he was, Zampoli was very close to the United Nations ambassador. Yeah. I'm not saying that Zampoli is a Russian spy or anything like that. But let's say he's an operative who takes advantage of certain relationships, to be a little bit more polite about it. is this what we're looking at? I mean, are we looking at someone who was not necessarily to her knowledge, but neither was Donald Trump to his knowledge, immediately working for the Russians, but that they're surrounded by Russians and Russian operatives?
At least what we can say, every time you dig, this is what pops up,
Yeah.
and it's just so much circumstantial evidence that it's not as if you dig and then you find it was something else, but all these names always pop up, and it's always Russian connections. And like Trump has said a million times, the Russia hoax. No, it was not a hoax. It's Russia. It's all over, and it's every time you do a little digging. It's on the economical side. It's on all these relationships, and all that we know from now the Epstein files and the Zampoli Ungaro evidence. So it's crazy. It's crazy, and
I think
it looks like a slam dunk. It does.
There's no other theory that one could look at this and say, okay, this is it's Israel, somebody else. You look at all of this, it's really this does come down to Russia, especially in Zampoli's case. And it's interesting to me that this guy, Zampoli, has been very good friends with Donald Trump since 1985, the same time that he was sort of recruited by Churkin and became a Russian asset, if you will. And that, he's been the best friends, really best friends. Amanda Ungaro, his former partner, describes him as really close to Melania, texting all the time. We see him traveling with the vice president currently, he's got a title of Special Envoy for Global Partnerships, which is a made-up kind of title. But
went on that trip to Budapest with the vice president, talking to the now deposed Viktor Orban and rallying the crowd to get.
Oh, that was the one he went on. I didn't realize that was the trip. Oh,
yeah,
wow.
That was the trip.
That was that trip. We see. I didn't connect that one, and that didn't help Orban very much, but thankfully. But it's. But it is interesting that there's Paulo Zampoli going on a trip like that to a Russian, friendly nation in this last year. So is it, if this was in Denmark, and you had the first lady, have a best friend who was a Russian operative for decades, connected to all sorts of Russian deals that are some of them illegal, had done deals with Donald Trump Soho. A lot of things have emerged about who Zampoli is. Wouldn't there be a massive outcry about the fact that there's a potential mole right next to the first lady? I mean, it seems to me like that in any other country would make big news.
Of course, and that is what baffles me, that that Trump really succeeds in getting a grip on the Republican Party and all institutions in the U.S. for these things not to have a consequence, for these obvious deep links, and all this smoke and mirrors that he's constantly playing now. Just last the other week in Ankara, all this talk about getting Ukraine licensed to make pack interceptors for the Patriot system, and all that is just throwing sand into the eyes of people, because that is not going to help the Ukrainians, and it's not going to happen. But it's just something that pops up, and then it keeps the press occupied, and all these commentators that just look at the surface. They think, but now Trump has switched sides and supports Ukraine and all that. It's nonsense.
It's never going to happen. Never going to happen. It's not who made him. He's made by a different country. But why is America is still a democracy in many ways? It has an independent media. I think I'm the only person who's reported on this story. I don't expect anybody else is going to pick up on this story. Maybe a couple of others have done it. It's going to stay about as buried as all the other stuff that I've surfaced in the last few years. And it's not like journalists don't see it. I know journalists are seeing it. I know they're all interested in the story. It just doesn't pierce the veil. It's sort of it's considered. I don't know what it's considered, but it's certainly not considered worthy of reporting, which makes no sense because this is the First Lady of the United States who might have a compromising character, a spy, right next to her or for decades. And it's just shrugged off.
Yeah. And that is what is baffling to me and a lot of Europeans, that Trump really has this grip on, the Republican Party and all the institutions, that this can go on. And it's like, people give up and there's no investigation into all this. That is insane.
Yeah.
And you have these statements, and then you have today JD Vance saying, well, this is all Mossad and CIA and deep state, all this Epstein. And it's like, okay, and no one does anything. And it's really baffling.
And tonight, in just a few hours, we can close on this idea that the same president who has so much control of everything is going to stand up and come up with a completely fraudulent narrative that the elections are under some sort of assault, that, the 2020 elections were stolen from him and that certain senators shouldn't be allowed to run for office. And everyone is going to just nod their heads. I really believe that. I think that everyone's going to say, yep, that's what the president said, and move on. And there might be some people say, well, maybe these aren't factual things, but for the most part, that narrative is going to make it into the zeitgeist, and that'll be the story.
Yeah, and it's baffling. It's like it's insane. And back in Georgia, Raffensperger or what's his name, a Republican. All the evidence is there. And they just let all Trump stooges, falsify everything and present these alternative facts and obfuscate everything. It's shocking.
This is why we have to go to a former Danish intelligence guy to find out what's really going on. Jacob, I know you've got dinner ready there, and you want to have that with your family. So I'm gonna let you go, but I want everyone to just make sure you follow Jacob Karsbo because of his incredible analysis. And you certainly won't get anyone saying anything as forthright as what Jacob has said from the current ODNI. But you're certainly not going to get it from Mr. Pulte or the new guy who couldn't even figure out that the 2020 elections were not rigged, and that Biden won in his testimony yesterday. So this is about as close as we can get you to the truth. You have to go all the way to the very, very northern tip of Denmark to find out what's going on. Jacob, tell everyone about the books that you've written on this topic, because they're in Danish, but they're good books, and I want people to read them, and I would like to read them actually, and I'm not quite sure how to get my hands on them.
No, Seb, I'm and I do apologize. I've been so busy, and and the reason I'm busy is because I always dig into these things. So I haven't even had time to find, a publishing house that would release it in English. But I was actually hired by a publisher to do a thing a couple of weeks ago, and a retired publisher from Denmark, and asked for his connections. And he said,
good.
"Hey, Jacob, maybe the thing is you should just get it translated here in Denmark, and then have it, up on Amazon and all these platforms, and just promote it on social media, and off you go. Maybe that's
so.
the easiest way." So maybe it's just what I will do when I'm done with my vacation.
I would love to read. I know a lot of people would love to read it, and because you do have incredible insight, and your own personal story is remarkable there. And I don't think these books are getting published, with as much freedom as we once had in the U.S. publishing world. I think the publishing world, like the media world, is pretty tight. Any last thoughts on this, as we should say, about Zampoli, about Churkin, about anything that it brings to mind from your time there? Anything else that you want to add?
As I said initially, this thing of Churkin, just seeing him in action at the UN, and then finding out all these things later on about how he was, one of the guys actually playing a part in recruiting Trump and organizing his trip to Moscow and all that. As I said, coincidence take a lot of planning, and it just looks like this is all a part of the Russian plan, and they've been fortunate. As John Bolton has said, they'll be drinking vodka straight out of the bottle in the Kremlin because of what Donald Trump has achieved in terms of getting to the presidency of the U.S. and doing all these things. So
If you think about how long.
it is actually a remarkable intelligence operation and one of the most successful. I hate to say it, but sometimes you have to give the Russians a little bit of credit.
It really is. It's 50 years, it's a long time to be running a consistent operation that keeps everything, secret. Really, they kept it under wraps for a very long time, and it's been effective. There's just no two ways about it. It's been a very effective operation. It's caught America off guard, and it's weakened America, which is exactly what the Russians wanted.
Exactly.
Jacob Karsberg joining us from vacation.
And that's the reality we have to deal with, Seth.
I know. It's a harsh reality. We're just going to keep pointing out the facts here to people. So when they watch the Russian disinformation exercise that's coming tonight at 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. on the networks, keep in mind our conversation today that there's a whole other narrative about who Donald Trump really is, and what he's putting out tonight is just Russian propaganda for the most part. Have a great night. It looks beautiful over there, Jacob, and have a fantastic time tonight. And hopefully we'll see you again soon here on Narrative.
See you soon. Thanks for having me, Seb. Always a pleasure.
It's always great to have you on. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.